Chapter 4. With an enveloping flash of light, Link hit the ground, a clumsy fall from too high onto hard, caked dirt below. He cursed the sky as he eased himself up, raking his hands through his hair, catching dried blood and twigs in his fingers. The thudding pain in his head amplified when he pressed his palms against his skull, pain that distracted from the panic and anger scrambling his thoughts. She had done it. Simply done it. The very same way she'd thrown herself into every other worst-case scenario that abacus in her mind catapulted her. There was no debate, no questions once she set her torch against the writing on the wall. And tonight, the message had been clear. "You're too weak." Instinctively his arm whipped back behind his shoulder, grasping the Master Sword's hilt. The weapon had made the journey. But not Zelda. Had she even considered trying to bring herself along? Or did her power only work when she was locking in her own suffering? The sword slid out of its sheath, and he let the blade wedge into the stubborn earth, leaning to bring himself up off the ground. An old man and his cane, his imagination taunted with that sadistic laughter that had broken in and infected his very soul. With a wild cry he began hacking at the grass around him, his muscles searing with impotent rage. After a few minutes he staggered back in the freshly bare knoll, and only then did he notice how remarkably high above Hyrule he stood, surrounded by imposing arches and stairwells, rapidly overgrown as the ivy and weeds reclaimed the stones as their own. A bitter laugh arose as he realized her power had unloaded his worthless body in the Akala Citadel ruins, as if even the goddess herself wanted to properly enunciate his failure.
"Perfect," he
muttered, leaning against a dubious pillar. The wind whistled through the fractures surrounding him, a haunting melody as his mind ricocheted from one regret to another fear. But she's alive. Link couldn't sense things, not the way Zelda could, that blessing and curse of fate's specter in her mind's eye. Still, in every way he could twist the game in his head, she was right. Whatever Ganondorf had come back from total annihilation for, he wasn't getting it without her. What she didn't seem to calculate, didn't even seem to consider, was how vague alive could be. She should know that. Of all the people in Hyrule, she had to know that. His back slid down the stone, soft from the sanding wind and velvet moss. He let his head fall against his knees, replaying that last breath before she emptied the light of her heart out into his exile. "I'll be okay." How many years since the upheaval had she woken up in bed screaming, lurching forward as if halting herself from the precipice of a giant fall, turned a 2-hour journey by horse into a full day's ride to avoid so much as passing the chasm, long boarded up and covered by the restoration crew, hidden in the crevices behind bookcases on the rare castle visit to Dryheave, and beg into his shoulder that this had to be quick, that she couldn't breathe in here, they had to get out? He tried to make it okay, bringing her forehead against his own, counting a deep breath in, another out, doing the same in tandem as her gasping evened and her heart slowed. He'd smooth her hair and try not to forget that her presence with his was a miracle. Time smoothed everything away, even wonder. Her humming as she thumbed through notebook pages, her smile seeing breakfast, the squeeze of her legs around his hips, her unquestioned closeness, slipped from a marvel into simply becoming his life. The light shifted, resting against the pillar. He slipped in and out of almost sleep until the sound of his name made him jerk back up. "Linky! Link!" From the side of the hill, purest platinum bouffant bobbed, and the sight of her old friend tucked into the ruins sent her into a full sprint. Her assistant Joshua followed closely behind, but held back when her mentor fell to her knees at his feet.
"I thought we were going to be too late,"
she said through short huffs of breath.
"Did I mention? This hill is really high."
She flicked her golden goggles over her eyes, wordlessly scanning Link as if he had any semblance of valuable clues.
"How did you know I was here?"
he asked, not bothering to fight the intrusion. She was going to get the data she wanted either way.
"We didn't,"
she said, apparently satisfied in her results and recrowning herself with the goggles.
"The evidence just suggested it."
She leaned back on her heels, tapping her telescope against her wrist as she narrated the evening.
I was up in the research lab, working on the same luminous stone mapping project that I've been doing for months. There's a definite connection between significant zoonite deposits in the depths and luminous islands in the sky.
Joshua broke in, humming with pure excitement. One vague suggestion of a raised brow from Pura, and she began fiddling with her pigtails, shifting her focus to the restless crickets catapulting through the grass.
As I was saying, between routine scans, the sensors started picking up an outrageous amount of energy. Low frequency, strange, nebulous stuff, which just happened to be gathering at the exact coordinates of your house. Before Joshua had time to confirm that we were seeing a surge of gloom manifesting on your front step, there was a second pulse, except this one. This was the highest frequency range I've ever seen. Just a few moments later, that reading repeated itself. Re-ite. Here,
she said, landing a playful boop on his nose.
After that, we didn't need a telescope to see what was happening. Why? What happened after I was sent here?
A weary glance passed between the two researchers. Finally Pura nodded, taking the pad from Joshua.
There's a caravan, a full cavalry of Yiga and deflected Garuda warriors. They call themselves the Varina.
She turned the screen to face Link, an image of the swarm galloping across West Nekluda. A cavalcade of Yiga on hovercrafts and carts made up the rear flank, looking laughably ramshackle next to the equestrian warriors that preceded them. Ganondorf led the charge from his titan of a steed, flanked by women riding in black robes, their faces obscured by silk masks, umber style that recalled the traditional shika. Behind him, pulled by two blanketed horses, was a golden carriage gilded with roof turrets and curtain tassels. That heady cocktail of rage shot through him once more, and he pushed the image back into Pura's hands.
How did they get out of Hateno without being spotted?
Link asked.
What?
Joshua gasped, anxiously pulling at her braid.
Of course they were spotted. They just...
She stopped herself, not needing to see the sharp glare through Pura's red-rimmed glasses.
They were spotted. They were confronted. Quite a few villagers heard the ruckus and came out to help.
Pura explained in an even tone.
They didn't last long. It's a wonder that he left the town before raising it. Maybe they knew no one was going to outrun them. He must be chomping at the bit to get into Hyrule Castle.
She paused a moment, then tipped the pad back, and tapped her elegant nail against the carriage in the photo.
Do you have any idea about what might be in here?
Her name jammed in his throat, and he could only nod at Pura's foregone conclusion.
She sent me here before they must have left. It was all she had the strength for. Because I couldn't stop him.
His stare shifted out to the horizon, where daybreak bathed the kingdom in warm, blossoming light.
Well, of course you couldn't stop a full rage-spiked Demon King. Your biggest battle in the last 7 years has been with Chuchus attacking your pumpkin crop.
Her voice was balmy, and he could feel the sincerity, even if he was far beyond soothing.
And the princess. It's astonishing that she was able to send you this far, this fast. I thought we'd find a much bigger mess up here, splattered on the stones. If I'm going to be honest, it doesn't make sense.
Link tried to argue out of this reality.
I watched him explode in the sky.
Pura pursed her lips, tapping the telescope against her chin.
Who? Exactly. Did you see explode in the sky? Because I don't think it was that man on the horse. The demon dragon exploded in the sky.
As much as he appreciated the wise scientist and her expert analysis, the last thing he needed was her patient teacher act.
During our battle, Ganondorf swallowed his secret stone, and we were able to destroy the source of his power from above. I think we've all been happy to think for the last 7 years that destroying the beast meant destroying the man.
She said. She stood, shielding her eyes for a moment as she noticed the sun cresting near Death Mountain's summit.
We shouldn't linger here. Once Ganondorf reaches the Hyrule Castle this afternoon, all of your friends are going to have to start laying low, at least if they want to keep their heads intact.
She winked, a playful tick that seemed deranged as she gave his knee a playful slap.
Come on, let's go find some higher ground.
End of chapter.